Right. And we're going to get started. So I assume we'll have more people come in, and I just want to get us started because I know we have a lot to do. I do all of that on the this week. So, as we mentioned in the email, we did a quick jury rig here of a hybrid option for Andre. So you can't see her right now, but he can sort of see you and you can hear us all. So he'll be able to tickle some things.
Can Andre chime in on his own, or does he have to ask?
No,
Raise his hand to talk.
may I introduce you?
Say that again?
Insect.
Okay. Not very loud. Okay.
All right. Yes. Oh, yeah. So let's start with our inputs. So welcome, everybody. I hope the fall is going well. Father. So today's meeting is really focusing on what we learned from the community engagement process. So we'll start off with a focus around the community survey, and we will come and present their findings. And then we'll take any questions you have about that. And then we'll shift and we'll talk a little bit about the focus groups. And Mira's going to present a summary of the focus groups, and we'll take any questions about that. And then the rest of the time will really be for your interpretations and takeaways from what you have heard and read about the survey results and the focus group results and how it affects your thinking about the options and the recommendations about the options. So I think what we'll do is just a round of like a go around, so everyone gets a chance to just say something about what their takeaways are. So if you want to put that in your mind now, that you'll have that opportunity as we open discussion, and then we'll just go from there, and they just have discussion. So good? Okay, and we'll pause when Meredith comes to do the this interpretation. Okay, is that by moving to section? Is it normal?
Sorry, Andre, you came on the big screen for a second there.
Okay. You know, that's fabulous looking go down. You know, it's like it's because I was like tight. Okay, let me keep this. Other than your height, yeah, perfect. Oh, it's two magnets. That's it. That's it down, but I can look at it. Here and people getting feet. Fire. I have been working with the community and the construction advisory survey that I have is all. I want to see if you had a chance to look at them. 28 handout survey results, but he got these really long holidays cards of gas. So I hear that if you want how long will do what that also captured in a support with it. So again, the survey was gave the put on the process based on the advisory for the Sycamore Street, Calgary State, the Rapid High School, Fort the Line School. Surveys was open from August 7th, this September 2nd, and was very well publicized. I viewed from the city and other parties. You see over 2,400 responses. She's the highest public engagement that the city did this survey in recent past, I believe. Thank you.
Most of the responses were received online, and there were also some paper surveys in various languages that were submitted. Next. I worked with Somerstat a lot to analyze the data and evaluate the takeaways from the data, and we found that the survey achieved representation in almost all of the different demographic categories that the city usually looks at, 73 out of 81 of them. Like a lot of surveys that are done in the city, they did receive overrepresentation in some groups and underrepresentation in other groups. Some of the groups that responded in the highest numbers to the survey included people of ages 35 to 54, which you can imagine would include parents, tend to include parents of school-age children, who of course would be the most interested in this because it affects them directly. Also homeowners and the households in the highest income bracket that of different household income levels across the city. Also women tended to take the survey more than men, and residents longer tended to respond in newcomers to the city. And certain wards, including wards 4, 5, and 6, which are the three most directly impacted by these locations, understandably also responded in the highest numbers to the survey. So, results you can see here I'll walk through each one, and then the remainder of the report is about a little more detailed analysis of some of the demographic variations for each of these questions, as well as the other questions in the survey. So for question 1, survey respondents were quite split for maintaining 2 separate schools. Combined school. You can see from the blue and green bar charts that difference is 45% in favor of keeping separate schools versus 41% in favor of having a combined school in some location. Remember, question 1 didn't ask what location people wanted to look at for the school. And statistically speaking, that's not really a significant difference. It's almost like an even, you might think of it as almost an even split between the two camps. Question 2, however, clearly large majority of the population does not want to use Trump Field for a school. Only about 30% of respondents felt that a school at Trump was acceptable, and the large majority you want to keep that as open space as it is now. Question 3 reinforces the conclusion from these first 2 questions that respondents are divided and that Trump is the least popular option. You can see in question 3 that the largest number of respondents chose option 1 to maintain 2 separate schools. And then if you look at all the different income brackets under 100,000, it's a little bit more mixed, but they tended to favor a combined school, both within their individual range subgroups that are shown here, and also when we group them into smaller income ranges to see if there's any parity, and it to be in favor of a combined school that is strong. And for perspective, there's a map on the bottom of the average of the median household income by ward, and the median household income for the city overall is about $122,000 as of 2023. And you can see that wards 5 and 6 are above the median income, and the other wards are at or below, slightly below the median income. And again, look at the number of people in each ward who said that either choice is acceptable. So, especially in the lowest income brackets. Next slide, please. Language. This chart is looking at the languages that people speak at home. And this was not a big predictor, but we included it just to show that we looked at this information. The people who speak only English at home or English and another language slightly prefer to maintain separate schools, whereas the people who don't speak any English at home, which is a very small number of the respondents, prefer a combined school. And similarly, not shown here, we also, one of the survey questions looked at whether immigrants or not. Immigrants also tended to slightly prefer a combined school. Next slide. We also looked at race for the people who reported their race in terms of how they answered question 1. 70% of the survey respondents were white, and they were pretty evenly split between having a separate or a combined school. The other races, Asian, Black, Hispanic, and people who listed 2 or more races, took the survey in less numbers than their overall representation in the city. So Those minority groups collectively are about a third of the population of the city, and they accounted for about 15% of the survey responses. So they did not take the survey in as high numbers as the white population, but it's still a good amount of data to make decisions from. And of those different groups, Black and African American, Hispanic, Latino, and people of two or more races tended to favor maintaining separate schools. And Asian respondents were more in favor of a combined school and were much less in favor of keeping separate schools. Next slide, please. And then we looked at whether people were parents, either of children under 18 or children of any age, even grown children. Majority of survey respondents came from people who are parents. Around 2,000 of the respondents out of 2,400 were people who are parents. And you can see across the top how they responded in terms of the age of their children. It also looks at parents of children with an IEP or special needs plan. And then also towards the right, people who were prospective parents of either their first child or another child. And then on the far right, the bar is for people who are not parents. So we found that people who are parents, who are not parents or who are parents of high school age children tend to prefer a combined school. And maybe that's due to all of their years of experience with different schools at Somerville and thinking about what worked. Maybe it's because if their kids are at the high school or finished at the high school, maybe they're thinking, oh, a big school isn't so bad. I mean, who knows? But they tended to have a different perspective than the people who have children more of the 2 to 8 kind of age group. Parents of children age 0 to 13 and parents of prospective parents all tend to prefer maintaining separate schools. And for perspective, again, only about 14% of the households in Somerville have children under age 18 at home. So pretty small share of the overall households in Somerville.
This says that people have to check the fees if
They could check more than one. So people who had children at different ages could check off more than one. So yeah, if you add them up, they add up to more than 24 whatever responses.
No, is that anything?
Well, I mean, if you look at it here, there's 462 who said they're not a parent, and then there's about another 250 who said they're prospective parents. So 700 who are not parents, and the other 1,700. Yeah, roughly, yeah, like 1,700 parents, right? Versus, right, one parent from each of the households, or yeah, half of the households. Yeah, it was well publicized, I think.
But because it's like couple usually have all the private things or on the thing up to tiny fraction of or Hispanic people inserts, which are the goals of the parents in the city. So then the lot of compute. Right? And so let's hold all the observations. Really make sure the light is and we'll get to that. That's fine. Then in time.
Let's just finish going through the survey and then we can. That's a good point. Yeah. Okay, next, school affiliation. So the question also asked, do you have a child either now or in the past at one of the public schools in Somerville or Prospect Hill Charter School or an independent or religious school? And please see the breakdown here. The pattern tended to be that, maybe not surprisingly, the people who are affiliated with Brown or Winter Hill School strongly prefer keeping separate schools. And also respondents affiliated with Kennedy, and to a lesser extent, people affiliated with Capuano also wanted to have separate schools. You'd imagine that a lot of people at Kennedy also came from Brown, so they may be identifying with the Brown community. And then Capuano tends to pull families from all across the city, so they probably have a different perspective than somebody going to more of a local city. The respondents affiliated with the other schools, including Argenziano, East Healy, Somerville High, West, and Prospect Hill Charter, for having a combined school to varying degrees.
Yeah. Brown response number. I'm sorry, they took it kind of here. Oh, sorry, the louder. Yeah. The Brown stool, I believe the student body is 200 and pumpkin student for, but yeah, 300. So is that both parents or the kids? Do we know that that's what it was? Or
It could be if you used to be at Brown also. Like if you had a kid that passed at Brown, you could check that off. So I think that's why it's higher. And well, you could have one child at Brown and one Kennedy, and you might check both schools off here. Be why. Next question. We're almost done with question one. The last little demographic look at question one. That we also looked at respondent age, and of course, a lot of responses, as you can see on top, came from people age 35 to 54, which you might assume would be the parents with children at K through 8 schools now. The people in the 35 to 44 age range, as well as children who took the survey. There were not that many, but a few children under age 17 and under who took the survey. Both of those groups tend to prefer separate schools. The other age groups, which you could loosely describe as not currently being in the school system, not having children in the school system, or maybe older children in the school system, were either closely divided in preference or somewhat more in favor of a combined school. Question two. So question two, a resounding no, don't use Trump. As clear from every demographic group, every subcategory, everyone everywhere does not want to use Trump. Or nobody is strongly in favor of E. Some people were more like, well, you could, but they weren't strongly in favor of using Trump. Only 30% of respondents found using Trump for a school acceptable. There was a little bit of comment from some of the respondents in where they could write in responses free form in question 5. Some of them felt that the question was ambiguously worded in terms of the second choice in the question. And you can see in the people like the bar there, the original wording of the survey question. The second option says a school at Trump field is acceptable. And a lot of people took that to mean, well, it's not clear how many people, some people took that to mean, I'm okay with having a school at Trump, but it doesn't mean that it has to be a Trump. Like if you have to put it in Trump, I'm okay with that. But it doesn't necessarily mean that they really want to be Trump. So when you add up people's responses for this, it's not entirely clear, whether they would have, if Trump was off the table, would they have picked a different school in some of the other questions. It's an interesting subtlety. The next slide, please. So question 3 asked about people's preferences among the 3 choices. And again, the highest number of respondents asked for preferred a new separate facility at Sycamore School and deferring Brown until later on, followed by having a combined school at Sycamore, and far behind that, the idea of having a combined school at Trump Field. And again, though, that it's a little bit, some people wrote in comments in question 5 that they wished that question 3 had let them pick more than one choice. And I think we thought about that in the subcommittee group, and we wanted to force people, the subcommittee wanted to force people to pick one option, because if you allow if some people pick 2 and other people don't, then it's hard to add up what you're getting out of that as a result. But on the flip side, I think some people might have picked a choice but maybe felt almost strongly that a second one might have been better too. And so you can't take these numbers absolutely because of that subtlety or vagueness. So because if you look at the people who picked option 2 and option 3, a combined school at Sycamore or a combined school at Trump, it's a large share of the overall responses. And if you think about taking Trump off the table, because question 2 showed that people don't want to use Trump, if you could have forced people to say, well, how do you choose between having a school at Sycamore versus having a school at keeping them separate, it's, maybe you would have gotten different results than what is shown here for these bars. I mean, you can't really know. But I think the good news is that the results are pretty close amongst all the options. And so it also makes it harder for you guys on the CAG, because there's not a, I don't think there's a super clear outcome of the survey responses, except that people don't want to use try. So a lot of it is going to be open to your interpretation of how you take the feedback from the different groups in the survey and different arguments that people made. Question 3, there's just one on the next slide. We just looked here. There's only a clean demographic breakdown for question 3 is how people answered that with respect to ward. And similar to question 1, wards 4, 5, and 6, which are the 3 wards that include these 3 locations in question. These wards clearly, or they all favor separate schools. Wards 4 and 5, which are Winter Hill and field location. The combined school at Sycamore is their second choice, whereas Ward 6, just Brown, where the Brown school is located, it's pretty well split between their second choice being either Sycamore or Trump. You could imagine that could be Trump is graphic, but then Sycamore. Same as in question 1. Wards 1, 2, and 3, which are at the eastern end of the city, plus our combined school at Sycamore. And respondents from another city, such as teachers or staff, live somewhere else, but work at Somerville, also or high school. And then question 7, Ward 7, which is West Somerville, is preferring also separate schools in the first choice. So, yeah. Okay, we're almost done. Another question 4 looked at the factors that people gave. There was a list of factors that appeared in the same answer, same order for each respondent, and then they had to reorder them to indicate which factors were most important in their decision, regardless of what their decision was. And if they didn't reorder them at all, then it was assumed that they skipped this question, and then their response would be dropped. So these responses only reflect people who didn't take the time to reorder these this list a little bit. And for everyone across the whole city as a whole and across each ward, and regardless of which option they picked, everyone picked walkability as one of their top 3 reasons. So it doesn't mean that was everyone's top choice, but that it was the most frequently selected choice in everyone's top 3. So walkability, and it's interesting because I know that the committee has talked about the fact that right now a lot of schools are considered to be walkable, but that a lot of people at every school come across the city, so that ladies good kind of factor. It did show that people that even the people who wanted to have a combined school were most interested in walkability. And the next slide is a little bit this. I'll get to that. Yeah, I think next slide was looking at the same responses to question 4 about which factors are most important in terms of whether they pick a separate school or a combined school in question 1. So the first column bar to the left are the people who picked in question 1 to maintain separate schools, and you can see that group. People who want separate schools value, those are the 3 highest reasons were walkability for students, maintaining school communities, and school size. The second column are the people who voted for some kind of combined school in option 1, regardless of location. And that group tended to pick, as their most frequently, school facility and amenity needs, followed by walkability, and then followed by screened programmatic needs. And that same group, people under the combined pool, you'll see also put a higher value on minimizing costs and construction impacts than the other groups, than the people who were looking for a separate group. And so you can see that there's a fair number of people, the people who said either is acceptable tended to follow a similar ranking of what factors to important.
Good year.
Then question 5, question 5 was interesting. That was the blank where people could write it if they wanted. So out of about 2,400, more than 2,400 people that the survey, you got over 1,000 respondents writing in comments. Some of them very long. Some people have clearly written like a whole memo and then they copied their memos into question 5. So there's a lot to get through. But it echoes a lot of what we see elsewhere with the survey. There are deep divisions on the overall scope of having two separate schools versus a combined school, but there's a universal agreement on not using from. So this 2-page summary here talks about the 4 main themes that we saw in people's responses. The thing that people said most often is don't use chalk field. It's, it's irreplaceable down. I think your new job is the old large flat site in the city for space. A lot of people mentioned that having a school there would cause traffic congestion on Broadway to be really terrible. They talked about the safety concerns of students crossing that extremely wide intersection of Broadway and Medford, and risks to students from the proximity, what people described as the proximity of explosive machinery and the hazardous chemicals to the DPW facility, as well as the likely soil contamination at Trump Field. And again, this is paraphrasing what people said. The second theme was being frustrated with the timeline and the city taking 2 years to get to this point. But frustration with the state's MSBA process, which is a very deliberate, carefully paced process. People were frustrated with the theme 3 is the main theme that we've been talking about, the conflict between different camps of having consolidated schools versus maintaining separate small schools. And some of the arguments that people gave in favor of maintaining separate schools are to focus on maintaining neighborhood identity and community. The fact that these schools serve as neighborhood icons and they're really give a sense of identity in the neighborhood. The schools are small and close knit, people know each other well. But there's long-standing traditions and networks and heritage associated with each school. There's also the belief that smaller is better, that small schools just perform better for students. Many people call the 900 student school idea a mega school. It's just too large for children, makes it easier for children to fall through cracks and compromise their learning environment. People talked about Brown and its historically high academic performance being partly due to its small size, and that if that's such a successful model, the city should replicate that elsewhere rather than doing away with it. It was optimism. Some comments focused on the closure of Brown as if Brown was closed, it might need some families to leave the public school system or move out of Somerville. Parents of students with autism spectrum disorder and other special needs expressed concern that a size and density of a large combined school would be overwhelming and detrimental for the children. And finally, people also talked a lot about walkability and accessibility of having separate neighborhood schools. Because Somerville does not provide universal busing, many people felt that keeping schools local makes it easier for students to have the option of walking or biking to school. And that if you merge them into one facility, it would force more families to drive long distances, cause more traffic congestion and safety issues, and can also be inequitable for lower income families who might not have the resources to be able to provide their children or lead the children to a school far away when they're there. The arguments that people tended to give in favor of having a new combined school focused first of all on these most fifth graders lots of path. Taking advantage of the NSP, something one thing now to create a large school and maximize the funding available then. And they said that if Brown needs to be funded later on through a separate tax override, and that got turned down, it's become a very large burden for the residents of Somerville. A lot of people talked about having a combined school in order to address what they saw as equity concerns by being able to integrate these two very different school communities, Brown and Winter Hill, together into one school.
Right.
A lot of people talk about Brown as a high resource community school serving a disproportionately affluent, less diverse student body compared to other schools such as Winter Hill. And they said that by consolidating them, they would bridge East and West Somerville and help create a truly diverse living environment for all children in one building. And a few
just a few respondents even used the term segregation to refer to these two schools being different, separate now. So they should be very more diverse. And finally, people also talked about a large school could provide the opportunity to have more modern facilities and things such as gymnasiums, cafeterias, specialized classrooms. It might also support a wider range of high quality specialized teachers and programs, unusual programs such as gifted programs, tracks, and robust special aid education services for efficient and taller service. And then the fourth theme is that a lot of people just mentioned this idea that I think we talked about in the last meeting of using the new building to create dedicated middle school for grade 6 to 8 or grade 7 to 8, and then changing all the other schools to be K-5 so that they could all have this for smaller, more focused age range that the routes get in. And finally, the last slide is question 6, looking at, in addition to the schools, what other types of capital infrastructure funding priorities that the city has to think are most important. And you can see here, these are the citywide results. The most important priority citywide was community facilities such as libraries, followed by affordable housing and living space. And then it's not shown here, but if you look at it by ward, there's a little bit of differences. Like Ward 5 chose community facilities most often, followed by open space. Ward 6 chose open space most often, followed by bicycle and pedestrian safety, and that community facilities and affordable housing. And then Ward 4 and the other wards, community facilities and affordable housing are less common choices. And that if you look at it by income band, the very highest income households chose most frequently to prioritize on bicycle, pedestrian safety, and accessibility, and then community facilities, and then open space. Whereas nearly all the other income groups under 200,000 was affordable housing first, most frequently, followed by community facilities and architects, right? So I hope that was helpful and not lucky retailable questions.
So I want us to wait until we hear the focus group results, which are, just expand on this a little bit before we go and do sort of takeaways. But if you have any questions about what you heard or what about the survey in Hub, and yeah.
Thank you so much. I appreciate the clarification. I just have a clarification question. You said of the 1,000 comments that people wrote in, or 1,000 plus comments, and you ranked it from 1 to 5. Do you know the proportion of those comments?
Very good.
About
Yeah.
particularly I was curious about the middle school.
Yeah, how many people was that?
Yeah, and I didn't have that here. I mean, it was more like we could all get
But to go back and check the specific provisions. It's always things.
Yeah, like a proportionality of it would be really helpful. And then I had another clarifying question around, you mentioned the racial subgroup data on whether they would combine, not combine. And you put together African American, I believe, and Hispanic, Latino. So I think another group, were you saying all of them respectively felt the same way, or did you look at them together as one group?
No, each group independent.
Okay,
Yeah, it's that chart.
thank you.
Do you have a demographic breakdown of who responded to comments?
No, that's that EFT. It's just
Yeah, no. If they primarily came from one subgroup, that might be what you feel like.
Any other questions? Yes.
Sobre los números de estamos viendo, ¿cuál fue el número exacto de los encuestados?
What was it? The people.
I'm sorry.
What was the exact number of the people surveyed?
2,400 and
What's the
39.
the one design?
Fast forward is like 9.
Ok, gracias. Continuar viendo las respuestas y las respuestas de cada una de las preguntas. No sé si es porque alguien omitió o saltó alguna respuesta, pero las respuestas by what 2,404 respuestas. By incos es lo mismo, pero respuestas by language 1,682. Respuestas por raza 2,389. Entonces, y luego el respuesta de los padres a hijos 2,936. Respuestas bajo afiliación de escuelas 2,747. Respuestas bajo rango de edad 2,416 y así. Entonces veo de que no hay, el número no cuadra en cada respuesta, sino que cada respuesta tiene un número variable de personas que respondieron. Entonces, debido a que se omitieron, se saltaron esas respuestas, o porque ninguno se cuadra con el número de personas encuestadas, las respuestas que ellos tienen.
People that participated survey total.
Yeah, that you're right about that. Some of the responses were optional, so people did have to answer.
So that was
And some of the questions, people chose not to provide that information. In some cases, we're showing where somebody preferred not to answer. I think in other cases, they are not shown because if they did a spot in input, then they want to count them. And for some of the questions, people could check more than one thing. Like if they were a parent of a child at one school, they can pick more than one school. So then there would be responses, more check-off responses than total number of people. So it depends on the question. There's a sitting number of answers. Does that make sense?
Solo me pareció curioso ver que en ninguna pregunta concordó con la cantidad de personas que se encuestaron. Curioso.
aligned with the total amount of people that should be surveyed.
Yes.
Yeah.
Was there any checking of duplicate or I don't know the right word here, but fake responses or people submitting multiple times?
Just refer to some good stuff.
Yes, we did run the number tests on that. So we checked not only the IP addresses that the responses came from, how many responses came from an individual IP address, as well as how many of the responses came from an individual IP address, because the school network and the city network was all one IP address. So we had some IP address that way. But we checked how many of those answered the same thing across all of the first 3 questions and also the first 5 of the 2. And we find any cases where the
Two or 31 questions.
And very few.
Actually, I need to school defense. With I'm trying into a distant. All right. Yes. Excellent. So,
I'm gonna let Mira take the lead since she did a lot of this analysis and drafting. And then I'll jump in and help at this.
please.
Okay, hopefully this will help add a little context to the larger numbers we just ran through. So just quickly going through who we talked to. We had 6 focus groups of coursing and college program. They were with several other school staff, parents, guardians, butters, and we were just from Brownsville. abutters and users of Trent Field, parents, guardians, children with battle severs, so reaching 0 to 4. Parents and guardians of Ponty usual learners, and parents, guardians of self-public schools. The city gives them no work with community partners to recruit for these. They self-selected and then were through a series of questions about their interest in participating in this. So again, the objectives of the focus group were just to supplement the survey findings to reach residents who might not otherwise participate in the process, and to deepen city and the CAG's understanding of the so across the 6 focus groups, these are things that you come up at least once for the group. So primarily people had a lot of number and interest in a successful debt inclusion mode, and a lot of concern and skepticism about achieving a second debt exclusion vote for future of the ground school renovations. Like the certain findings said, Trump Field was a particular interest. People were interested in keeping it. There were third space, random use, and the public pride. These states that get that cool. Focus groups people were interested in the possibility of expanding baby space. Some participants felt like a larger facility would give more opportunities for additional community needs and activities. And felt that a fairly large school had concern about vacant school buildings resulting in crowds with both. Right under that, maintaining neighborhood schools. People were interested in the benefits of neighborhood schools, particularly being close to a school in their neighborhood, and felt that for some that keeping the schools separate was significant, and that the neighborhood schools was significant enough reason for schools separate. While other people understood the preference for neighborhood schools, but she thinks it was enough rational. And a lot of people raised they felt like the ground school building conditions were unreasonable in the medium term and mid-medium term after, and raised concerns about leaving it unaddressed, this project. There was a lot of concern across those groups about vacant buildings, and varied recommendations about how to use the vacant buildings. Some of them being rededicated building those ground scheme or be diverted. And the Florida, the budget was a plan for transportation walkability. So if you were to consolidate schools, cost students at the Brown would get to the new site, and also a strong desire for the house first. And the last big one was the opportunity to enhance equity for this decision. People raised that they hoped that the final decision could increase equity and socioeconomic integration within the schools, and also promote equitable educational experience because of this. So I'm going to go into each of the focus groups because they raised. They're organized here based on option. In front of you, there's more detail on different considerations they raised. So the first grouping up was Public School South. They unanimously supported option 2 to combine the schools of the Sycamore Street site. In regards to option 1, they felt a real strong acknowledgement, understanding of the community that's been fostered at the Brown School, but felt that the lack of ADA compliance caused treacherous conditions for staff who need to visit the school and students who go there today. They felt like the mobility limitations and they excluding participation from the school was enough reason to not wait to address the growing needs. They also shared a lot of concern about the risk of the building failing and what would happen to Brown School students or other space in the district, given the fact that they perceived a lack of screen space or alternative options for housing for those students. They felt strong skepticism about a successful debt exclusion vote, and noted that there were other schools within districts that needed additional support and a second because that discussion. Okay. So for option 2, there was a lot of excitement about the ability to build in more flexibility for programming and creating dedicated spaces over a larger facility, like the possibility of the lab space or art space or community use spaces like playgroups. In their eyes, a larger school facility offered more options for students and to create spaces in the school for students in the in-program that worked best for them, and felt like more space options near this perfectly. A big other central topic was the location. A lot of them felt like a quote was that students who were attending the Edgerly still travel back to the 6th Forestry site to use the play field or area. So they felt that it was an ideal location for a school facility and felt like it was a core part of the surrounding community at 6th Forestry. And other notes they made were that it avoids the 6 to 8 transition, that you don't have the issue of the building failing at the ground and lacking swing space. And they felt like the Sycamore Street location was close to the high school, that it was ideal for transporting. If older kids were walking their younger siblings to school, they were in close proximity to the high school.
Yeah, just to add one thing is they also said that outreach, if you were to consolidate the schools, real outreach to the families and the communities around the Brown School and finding ways to do a transition that was going to maximize their concerns would be real.
One main thing they raised was that it was just interesting to note is that one person came into the focus group feeling like she would have spread option 1 with job security line. She felt like consolidating school or staff jobs at potential risk. And by the end of the conversation, felt like if jobs across staff and type positions were secure, that she would. Some people were sticker shock scared at the 900-person capacity and were interested in how the design would maximize the students' their real community. And then, as the survey said, not any interest in the Trump bill. That was a traffic, street walking. It's all the just.
Can you say anything about the breakdown? Participants, were they from central admin? Were they teachers, faculty, play school?
Yeah, mix. There were teachers from different schools. There were some who taught in different schools. There were specialists who went back and forth to different schools. There were some parent liaisons. There were some who were directly affiliated with Brown and some who were directly affiliated with Winter Hill. And some were also parents of kids in the schools were former parents, the parents of kids who used to be in those. One of the teachers said that she, back in the last time the Brown School was threatened to be closed, slated to potentially be closed, she was part of the movement to stop that from happening. And now she is on the other side and sees that the school just is not, she was more worried about the condition of the school and not seeing it as what?
The next group was parents of students and abutters of the Winter Hill School, Brown School. There were 7 Brown School parents, Winter Hill School parents, and other parents abutting the school building. So I think at least one participant didn't have a child in either one of the schools, but lived near the state, had no children. They unanimously supported option 1, addressing Brown School and the Winter Hill School separately. A lot of them spoke to the interest in neighborhood schools and appreciation for the community that's forged between the parents who live in the same area and had kids going to the same school. And several of them noted that they purchased their homes to be close to the schools. They also spoke to walkability and the ease of getting their kids to school. They talked about that as a key for usage, and they really felt that there were beneficial their educational benefits to having smaller schools for young children and students in youth growth. One parent expressed concern about this option because they felt like if the ground school faced some kind of failure, they could no longer accommodate its students, and were concerned about what that impact would be on the other schools in the district. Some interesting considerations is that they raised that there was future housing development that could happen in the west side of the schools. There might be benefits to the city. So there might be benefits to having a school located on this side of the city, the west side of the city. And there was interest in like minimizing the level of ground school renovations and what that cost would be if we added cafeteria or a gym and just did the day-to-day compliance screening got waivers, but
Can you speak more about that with the ground school, minimizing ground school renovations myth? Them?
Yeah, so one of the parents felt that there's no need for that. The school is fine as it is. It doesn't need a cafeteria. It doesn't need a gym. That's part of its charter. You could probably get waivers for some of these ADA requirements. And so maybe you could do this in a way that's like under the threshold or at least dramatically reduce cost. So that was sort of their response to the like question of how is the city going to, what's going to happen if this school is not addressed now and then, it has some kind of failure or there's really interest in, addressing the ADA concerns that people have talked about. I think one of was it in the, which group was it where they said their kid there was a kid who had to stay out of school because they just had to stay home because they could get up and down their stickers at the ground school.
I think, and also interesting about the debt exclusion for this group, there was not a lot of concern about the success of the debt exclusion. They did acknowledge that a large portion of the city is probably unaware about the conditions of box schools. So it felt like there was probably a need for a strong campaign about the school's needs, but there was a lot of concern about it.
Yeah, for the first, they didn't talk much about this. Okay.
And also just because I think it's an interesting point there, the people in this that you said were non-parents who were abutters of the schools. Any other particular things that came out from those conversations? Because that's a
Yeah, I think it was that's what you said that like property values of our house and we purchased the house to be near school, and I think there was one of the parents who lived nearby. There was a reason their kid went to a different school.
Yeah, it's fine. It just because it comes across in a couple of the different focus groups because like the special parents, students, and special needs board is like some of them about the Sycamore students, so they don't know about it.
Good. I mean, I'm curious if there was anything in this specifically about construction around Sycamore Street being a particular concern in that neighborhood.
Other groups raised concern about the demolition was supposed to be in the staff section. It was concerned about demolition and wanting awareness. And another group, I believe the abutters Trump Field actually brought up like sewage capacity around that area that was going to flush those right out of the 9th residents.
And I think there was a group where just the question of the height of the school and concerns about that on the neighborhood.
But that wasn't this group.
That was
I don't think it was this group. No, it was in the East group. So, yeah, the special.
This is bad.
The butters on the Trump Field site. Trump Field site. They expressed a preference for option 2, combining the schools at the Sycamore Street site. As you can imagine, a lot of the conversation was about not having the combined school at Trump Field. But some of the reasons they preferred the second option was maximization of the MSBA funding. They shared strong emphasis on the importance of the cost for the moment, and felt one notice they raised that they felt like continuing to fund renovation of Brown School was an inequitable use of city funds, and felt like a larger school facility would create centralized use of city resources, and a higher enrollment capacity ensure that more students, particularly those from different neighborhoods, would access the same quality of education. There was also the legally compliance at the Brown School. They felt like the risk of the school district's enrollment capacity at the limit, and future Brown building failure would cause the same difficulties of the winter of sports programs.
There was some comments, also they understood and liked neighborhood schools and walkable schools, and to some extent saw that just maybe as secondary to the cost issues. But there was some interesting comments about how in the past Somerville had 21 small neighborhood schools. And so over time, and the Brown is the last of those in operation. And so that this is just, where the city has been moving over time.
And similar reasons for Trump Field, they felt like a lot of that in the green space, who tend to that area. They raised the concern about the amount of large machinery entering and exiting the DPW site, and felt like that was not a safe environment for students in the area. Shared transportation for students who would be in the Brown School catchment area, getting to the Trump Field site, and adding to the car congestion.
And one person again did say that their historical understanding is that it's always been a field. In fact, to the comments about soil and contamination, felt very strongly that was not a concern because it's always been a field, and that is part of why historically to keep it strong.
This was a particularly interesting focus group because we were at a play group for very young, and there were bench things around. So very funny. We just have some see for mostly these things. So okay. So they were divided between option 1 and 2, and again expressed because of the Trump Field option. The support for option 1 with rebuilding school or trustees was separately was largely due to some more support for smaller schools. Most parents expressed a strong preference for small schools for their own children, and noted that small schools worked well for small children. Some parents felt like this was enough to choose option 1. Some people felt like it ranked lower in their considerations. Again, people liked that the schools were situated in their neighborhoods, and liked the idea of keeping blocks there, the children's schools, and people felt like maintaining the 2 separate schools increased the great deal of block around children. Those who were concerned with option 1 raised that they felt a strong level of skepticism about the project's cost. They questioned whether or not residents would support a future standalone debt exclusion directly from. They also worried that a new expensive project might emerge to the city and then kind of delay the renovation. Parents in this group who supported the combined school liked the idea of additional alternative use spaces. They cited things like the maker space near high school, and were excited about the idea that places that could host more citywide events, and residents who didn't have children being able to use the school that's through space. They felt like a larger school facility would offer more options to do that. They also raised that bigger facilities have more options for different types of programming. So that, and that the enrollment capacity of the school being larger to account for future needs, and was more important than the individual preference. They raised conservative options to the idea of 2 vacant buildings if they want to look up third option at the Tremors Wolf site, and or resulting vacant building at the blurring out site. Again, no interest in the option 3.
I mean, I think there was 1 or 2 people who were open to it, but not supportive.
And this is after the last this group we're getting so I think we're still tracking. So we had a blank suite with parents of students in special education programs. They were from across the schools, with some representing Winterfell, Brown schools, and Bios Healy Board, the schools in the district. The group, particularly the Brown School and Winterfell School parents, lead towards separate school buildings, and other participants expressed wariness about the success of events. They largely focused, the things that they did agree on were a lot of outdoor space and recreational space for students, and across options, thought of those kind of priority. So the parents that supported option 1 emphasized the importance of K-5 school model. They felt like there were a lot of educational benefits to maintaining a K-5 school in the district, and parents who were a little bit more concerned with the option were concerned about the urgency of addressing issues at the Brown School, and cited the inaccessibility as a risk to students who attend or just live now, and staff members that their mobility needs are currently unmet, or if their mobility needs will change. And this was in reference to someone, a student having an issue with a broken leg and needing to access. The one parent noted that special education services don't have a specific space, and a lot of dedicated special education spaces in the building needed a really handable option for at the Brown, an untenable option with our environment.
And they,
There were some, I would say that the more most concerned option raised the issue of the debt exclusion bill, and were skeptical about voter fatigue and the ability to successful debt exclusions.
but yeah, the one other thing I wanted to add was the concern. There was a concern for the for a parent with a student in the AID program about how in special ed at Brown, I can't remember, but having a small school really allowed for a close relationship between parent and the principal, so that when her student, had behavior that was not within the norm, there was a lot more leniency or personal connection between the administrators and the students and the families. And so some concerns about a really big school and how they would support really student needs and be able to build those relationships.
But I think you mentioned this before, but were any of the staff in the focus group special education staff? Teachers?
I don't believe any were dedicated special education staff. I think there were specialists who provided classes to special students within special education programs.
Were any of these, did that come up more specifically with some of these questions about special education students in the context of that focus group?
In the teacher
In the teacher one. Like, I'm curious about the crosstalk between staff and parents of this subpopulation of students.
I mean, I would say that teachers or the educators, were concerned about the mobility of staff as well as the mobility of students in the Brown, sort of, physical disabilities and physical challenges, but not so much. I don't think they spoke directly about. I think they did say, you can have a small school environment in a larger school. So they didn't really, the educators weren't really say they were concerned about students minimums at a larger school. Yeah.
Yeah, so divided on the K-5 versus K-8 issue for parents who thought some parents thought there were parents who supported option 2 felt like there were benefits to the K-8 model, and supporting find school because they thought that it introduced like role models and cross transitions for students. They cited like interest in more community space in the district and felt like the MSBA funding was a narrow opportunity window about the solution advantage of. This is where it's about losing recreational space at the Winter Hill site. A lot of land was expanded. They raised concerns about the height of the building and the impact of that on ice melting and casting shadow on that neighborhood, and then resulting neighbors non-cubic the ice melting down. And there was a lot of concern about the capacity, the size of the school, and resulting impact on relationships between students and administrators and operations. There was like a tinge of interest in option 3 that maximized more recreational and outdoor space for students, but for the most part, they felt like last slide. We had a special. This is for the yes. There were more participants in this group. They were one person to express strong preference for option 1. The remaining participants said they had no preference, strong preferences regarding the size or the location of the school, as long as it was in close proximity to families and there was enough space for outdoor recreation. The parent who supported option 1, keeping the school separate, felt like it was important to prioritize Winter Hill schools' unique needs and do some programming and hope that the new space would be able to allow. One parent noted that the current locations are close to families and therefore go back. And then for option 2 and option 3, parents expressed late interest in the larger school building for again be able to host large school-wide events or citywide. But the parent support option 1 felt concerned about the building of that size being the appropriate place to and across people were interested in transportation and want to make sure it's easy to walk or travel by bus.
In school locations.
I'm eager to hear advice. It's perfect.
Yes. So first, any questions, and then we can open to we'll do a go around some takeaways, both the focus groups and the survey. But any other questions on this? Yeah.
Some feedback I got from some people I know who were at some of these felt that their particular focus groups were not super diverse. And I don't know if any analysis was done about the diversity and the demographics of these groups, within their subpopulation relative to the survey, and if there are any concerns that were missive voices as a result of that.
I don't know if Nick want to say anything else about the improvement, but I think, yeah.
Yeah, I think that's important feedback in terms of the diversity of the focus group. I think one thing that was a limiting factor is just the amount of time it takes to participate in a focus group, and realizing that you want to, in the future, maybe like look to find ways to kind of diversify participation in such conversations.
It's just some feedback I received from some constituents with that the survey, the focus groups date conflicted with Jewish holidays. And so they weren't able, it's like October 7th, which isn't technically a holiday, but it's a day of observance. It's great. And specifically couldn't attend because of that. Were other days offered and or other options that they couldn't participate because they came to admit it, they didn't back up.
I know that the high goal days were avoided, right? Because I couldn't attend those.
But Nick, I don't know if you had heard any feedback sort of relates. Well, I heard the feedback. So I was getting the feedback from people.
Yeah, I appreciate you asking that on so we can putting that into sign in the future.
But were there any, if anybody did reach out about not able to attend, were they offered other dates or any, how exactly did that work? Forgive me if I forgot that.
Yeah, in terms of selecting participants, he offered a number of options to people who expressed interest in a particular group, and we sent invitations and confirmation to participate a 100 people who selected an option that works for them, majority of the group. And if somebody goes back, if you back on a specific option, for instance, when we're recruiting for the special education focus group, there was looking for the engagement activity that's APAC had been putting on, and he hadn't adjusted our availability for so that to be that.
Okay, it looks like Andre, you have a question or? So we'll take down the level. Andre?
Okay. I still say the policy thing. Basically, almost always be more prejudiced. People is called those two didn't do at the time and in Spain's time. People get in and additions, interested warrant, always still place you can't more privileged to have fun with these sooner. So at least you get more this is big but that's the students what's you but not
But is very question. Sí, acerca de los grupos de enfoque.
Peppers too.
O sea, era buscar comentarios de las personas en estos grupos para ayudarnos a ver un amplio
For us to have in one book.
interés de ellos en esto. Pero en lo que respecta al primer grupo de enfoque de School Staff, fueron solo 9 participantes. Entonces ustedes dicen que lanzaron en general para que las personas quienes quisieran atender, pues era algo voluntario.
So that's because we find
Pero en la respuesta de ellos habría
they're
que ver también si estos participantes eran maestros que viven en Somerville, fuera de Somerville, maestros que han tenido que ver con Winterfield o Cole Brown, o depende de las escuelas, porque de eso depende el punto de vista. Porque los maestros que actualmente trabajan en Winterfield y en Brown tienen una perspectiva diferente a los que están en la Healy o los que están en la Presiano. Y si viven dentro de Somerville, pues saben de lo que estamos hablando en las distancias, en el tráfico, en lo que estamos hablando, versus los que viven afuera. Luego, el grupo de enfoque entre padres de escuelas de Brown y Winterfield somos las escuelas afectadas y no puedo creer que han sido solo 7 padres que han querido expresar su voz en el grupo de Resolve. Porque siento que muy pocos, siendo las 2 escuelas más interesadas en este cambio. Y no sé cómo fue que se habló de
grupo de enfoque porque yo soy madre de Winter Kids y estoy activa y nunca me enteré cuándo fue, pero tal vez por estar acá es que no tendría participación en eso. Pero como les digo, no escuché nada. Colindantes de Trumpville, 8 participantes también. No sé cómo también porque yo soy una de las más cercas al Trumpville y tampoco me enteré de en qué momento este grupo de enfoque iba a suceder. Padres de niños de 0 a 4 años, pues me imagino 9 participantes. Puede ser porque hay padres que todavía no saben del futuro de la escuela o cuando alguien desconoce cómo funcionan las escuelas, pues su interés cambia. Pero luego los padres de educación especial, que solo han sido 7 personas, y si nos vamos a los AIM programs, pues los AIM programs están localizados en Papuana, en Winterton, y no sé si alguna otra, pero no son todas las escuelas. Y también 7 personas siento que fueron muy pocas. Yo soy madre de niños de educación especial, una en el programa y una con IG. Tampoco me enteré cuándo fue este grupo de enfoque. Y luego con los padres multilingües, pues 4 participantes, entiendo de que a veces los padres de otra habla o que no nacieron aquí es diferente lograr conectarnos con lo que está sucediendo, pero yo me considero que entro también en el enfoque, no solo como hispana, porque también hay asiáticos, hay de otras razas que, o sea, tampoco me enteré. Entonces, ¿en qué momento se dieron? ¿Cómo se publicitaron estos grupos de enfoque? Porque considero que si hubieran sido bien publicitados, no creo que muchas personas no hubieran querido dar su comentario, ya que en verdad, esto que está sucediendo hoy sí creo que el 70% de Somerville lo sabe y saben sobre lo que se está queriendo realizar. Entonces, esos son los puntos que pienso sobre los puntos de enfoque. Y si nos damos cuenta en lo de cada grupo, por lo menos entre las pocas cantidades de personas, todos acaron en que no Trumpville, algo de lo que creo que aquí nos hemos dado cuenta también. Y el otro ha sido casi la mayoría, si se dan cuenta también de los que contestaron, todos expresaron su preocupación de lo fuerte que va a ser los niños de educación especial naveguen en un edificio muy grande. Entonces, por lo menos podemos ver que son 2 puntos que todos estamos concordando.
All of us are trying to find solutions to.
Yeah, I want to say a little bit about why the size just kept small.
Happy to speak to that question. Appreciate the question on the. I'll stop you so you I don't get through this. Yeah. Thanks, Andy. Appreciate the question. I run. I'll echo Department of Communications and Communication with the city. In terms of getting people to participate in this survey, answering the survey, you were trying to get as many possible opinions as possible, get as many survey responses as you could. So we did really broad out of speech there. When it came to the focus group conversations, we were trying to keep them relatively small to approximately 8 participants. The reason being in the course of the conversation, we wanted to make sure that we called out that it had kind of like time and space, which there's their perspective is like come up with things that they were thinking about. It's like if with respect to the questions that the face of the community about the skill building project. So there was an intent to keep them relatively small. So then we were recruiting people to participate. We wanted our outreach there to be relatively targeted because we weren't trying to have to try to people away from participating in the focus group. We just like to get them approximately a number so these folks could have it in that conversation include this.
Yeah, and also one of the focus groups, the people with the youngest children, I think that focus group was only an hour long because they felt that during the PhD with suddenly and to last for an hour and a half. But for the other groups, they were an hour and a half long, and if you didn't want to make them longer than that, because that we're attending. And Houston never was willing to participate. And again, I want to keep them solved aside so that if the collaborative helps develop that on the format of the focus group. So on the CCI would say we wanted to be able to solve that we could really have this conversation. And it's an example of surveys now to meet the big representatives, be pulling in and planning the city.
Yeah. So, yeah.
Well,
Perfect.
I think you were quicker.
Okay. You mentioned whether the groups are diverse or respected. I mean, I can see that some groups are spending really, really low numbers. But it seems to me overall that the focus groups seem to be representative of at least the people that responded, because it seems to me that the answers track, right? Like who self-identify as staff in the survey. I mean, the trends seem to me, I don't know if I'm not interpreting it correctly, but seem to be similar. The only thing that I have to say is in the Hispanic or multilingual focus group is so small, it's hard to know whether it is tracking or not with what you see in the survey, which is also a little bit hard to interpret because it's one thing in not speaking English at home, and another thing is in Hispanic. It's sort of the opposite. So I don't know really how to put that. The numbers are similar, so I don't know how to interpret that. This is my interest, but I can see that overall things track. So maybe they validate each other. I do not. It's taken. That's why. I don't know if that's what the numbers end up saying, but that's what I read when I look at the numbers. Huh?
So I want us to open it up and not just if you have questions, you can ask questions still, but also if you want to share perspectives or sort of takeaways, you could do that as well. And so,
no, I mean, I don't need that. I'm fine with my operational.
Okay. Yeah. I guess if with the focus groups, which I think were really interesting to read and actually very helpful, like if you pay less attention to the opinions of anyone or the small paragraph at the top, even saying which option people preferred, and just look at the things people are thinking about, like their list of things matches all the stuff we've been talking about, right? So we're not like, I think that is actually like the much richer data source here when you look at this stuff, and because perfect data doesn't exist, it's just kind of useful to see that all the these are interesting things to talk about, and I would like to talk about those concerns a little bit more than the validity of any one focus group conversation.
Yeah, and in fact, we really did try to focus, people would tell us this is our preference, but the joy of the focus group over the surveys, we could say, well, tell me more about that, right? Why, what makes that important to you? And sort of be able to get out all of the we heard from one person, for example, about equity. Look, don't just consider the implications of combining Brown and Winter Hill. You should also think about what would happen if Winter Hill is this beautiful new school. Well, then what happens to the more affluent families at the Healy? And will you draw all of those families away and leave inequity in that environment? So, trying to get more nuance, right, into these questions of what is it, so if equity is important, your advice might be, well, we need to think about that across the board, right? In how the other order effects, second order effects of some of these decisions, right? Those things. Under.
Good. Yeah, I said this is similar. It's just that I think for me, the big takeaway is there's no cleans, right? I mean, there's always this hope that if we strengthen the data, we cut it enough way, or fine, all right, it's okay. And yeah, I think that like this media is different. So I think they insisted on interest decoration is legitimate because these are just street, right? Yeah, I think that there are the movement in the same in college and the videos. And you know how much let's do this. Make us tree. But even on time, even at these campaign, it's going to way up there too. So I think ultimately speaking, as going to be a horrible gut check. Now, whereas yeah, I'm saying. So for me, it was all right. But the other stuff, you like the closer you are to a situation, the voice or a station minute with been more close to your place. That's the one thing. But that's obviously the place that's super important. And it's a don't stand. So and we'll try out the place is the one happy when I'm not succeed. That's why that's 2 weeks. You just will take away is losing you want it and also to the and to
No right answer, no wrong answer? Or one wrong?
There's a couple of
Pretty clear wrong answer.
Well, but it's some seeds, hands, right? And the class, I so good stuff out it.
Yeah, I mean, one thing, I think it's credit to this group that just about everything we saw in here was anticipated by our conversations for the most part. Both in focus groups, both in the survey results, it kind of went the way we think or thought it would. I agree with Andre in that I think it's impossible to kind of get to understand or predict what like the second order effects are going to be. Like if you move a school eastward, well, that's going to change dynamics at the westward, and it's going to change dynamics locally at Healy east or something. So I don't think it's possible to predict those. So I think we do have to just kind of go with, there's a few known knowns, and I think we got to this last week with last month, which was there's strong preference towards Sycamore. Question is probably around size. There's also kind of a question of, if not Brown, what do you do with Brown, which is not really our scope. There's an important thing to kick back to, I think, the city, to the school committee, which, there has to be a better answer than just self-confidence. Right? But that's not our scope, so I don't want to open up that can of worms. But, I think we have enough information to deliberate, because I think we've had the best conversations I've heard about is citywide up in here, and I think it's a credit to all of you, because we have gotten the right perspectives, and I think they match what we saw via surveys. They match what some data.
So other reflections or takeaways, and we'll just try to give everyone a chance to say something. Yeah.
I think what was really striking to me, can you pull up the slide that has the
Sticks in every soon.
kind of how they rank their preferences versus like option 1 versus option 2? Because I think that's a really important slide because it captures some critical things. It would have been from
Question 4, I think.
yeah, that one. That one.
This
Nope.
This-
Next one.
this one?
Next one.
That's enough.
Yeah, that's because I think this is a really interesting slice that I think hits a lot of the issues. Obviously, again, there's no perfect data. The thing that struck me the most about this right away is how cost is really relatively minor across the board, regardless of what you prefer. And I would assume we don't have the information from this slide, but I bet if you dug this down in terms of demographics as well, I mean, clearly there's, relatively speaking, less people who are ranking cost at the top there. And I think that's an important thing for us to take in mind. That's really valuable data. I will say my initial response to this is there is a clear opposition to Trump Field, which is something that everybody in the community has been saying for 2 years. And it does feel like a huge waste of opportunity that we spent a lot of time talking about this. It's something that I think we'll have to reckon with as a city in terms of building trust and stuff like that, because people have spent a lot of time not feeling like they're listened to. Again, my own conversations there. But the fact that it does seem like there's kind of this split on one building versus combined tends to tell me that what's still missing is the clear direction from school committee and district leadership about what we want as a preference there. And I know there were some conversations at school committee recently. I mean, unfortunately, I think they've just come in relatively late in the process. honestly, that lack of clarity on educational preference really suggests to me that there's no strong preference and the status quo is fine. And so, I think overall, I feel personally like I lean towards the combined school, but I'm also hearing a lot of good arguments against it. And so it's tough, and it's not like a final answer there. Some of the comments specifically around vacant buildings, and I know you said it's not the scope, but what do we do with the brown building if we're not there? I find it really hard to support a combined school in the absence of some leadership from the city or the school committee around that. Just because we can be victims of our own, just not thought through consequences in that regard. But yeah, I mean, overall, I think, the point is good. It's not like it's providing necessarily any, like, the city clearly wants this, but it is making me think a lot about these particular issues. The other piece I found really compelling, and it was a voice I don't feel like we'd heard from a lot, was the school staff strongly preferring, for what sounded like educational and programmatic and needs reasons, a combined school, partially to sort of remedy in a roundabout way the lack of ADA compliance at Brown is kind of what I took away from that too, is one partial reason. And I think that there's, that's a voice I feel like we haven't heard very much on, so I want to give it a good weight as well.
So being a position.
Rich, to do it's just 2 quick points. Unfortunately, for everyone in this room, probably most of all, maybe we are not done talking about tone field, because for the XBA feasibility analysis, we do have to demonstrate that as an option, because it's the only other option. And by the process, we have to mass it out. I find that the fact that we went through the community survey and the focus groups and this to be enormously helpful, because we'll be able to use this as evidence and data that it is unsupported when we, ultimately go for the debt exclusion. So I'm very happy to have had it now. That conversation is not over yet. It was not with the high school. With the first submission of the feasibility study on the high school, they had dismissed Trumfield, and MSBA said, "Oh, you didn't do your homework enough." And there was additional work that that PMA, SMA had to do to amass evidence against Trump for the high school. I think we're a little ahead on that. On Trumfield?
Yeah. So it was already dismissed. Why is it an option now? Why even so that?
It's a different size school. It was really dismissed on the size of the high school. Yeah. But we still have to talk about it. To the second point on the use of the brown, it is far too early to say exactly what the use of the brown will be in 2021 and beyond. But I can safely say that I don't see a world in which it's viable to sell that thing anytime soon. While it is obviously an older building, not fully ADA compliant, it has issues. In our overall building portfolio, it is actually one of our better buildings. It is currently occupied and has a certificate of occupancy, but has a certificate of occupancy for educational use. I will also say, as the focus groups, particularly the educational focus groups, pointed out, that we do have upcoming work that is going to be necessary on the other schools. Some of that work cannot be done while they're fully occupied. To do some of the work that we need to do at the West, the Healy, the Kennedy, the Genziano in the 2030s, we are going to need classrooms for swing space. Right now, the only building where we've got classrooms for swing space is the Brown. How we actually exercise that, whether we keep the Brown open and use the new building for swing space as we do things, or the Brown, either way, I foresee students being in the Brown school for as long as any of us are going to be worrying about it.
That's really
success.
Chris, thank you. And I appreciate that insight from Director Rich as well, because I very much feel similar to the way Matthew is. And because it seems like the concept of Trump, and I still feel this way potentially, or I'm questioning it, if the concept of Trump as this 900 student potential there is more to get and shepherd the community and potentially the CAG to get more
into the concept of a 900 student school and to eventually close the Brownell combined schools rather than the actual location. And then it becomes the actual question of, and again, I think that the results are clear that it's what Ryan has been saying all along and what I've as well, is that if the communities that will be most effective at this, Winter Hill and Brown, like 4, 5, and 6, and some of the other wards that are closely, they want to preserve their communities, and they like the smaller school models. I think what we're seeing and what we've been saying is it feels right in this in the survey. The focus group I'm still processing and I still have lots of questions about. However, the survey seems right. And so, yeah, where do we go with this whole concept of Sycamore? Because we know Winter Hill School needs something and we need to be rebuilding that quick. I still don't feel comfortable at all with the concept of a combination school, and this data backs it up the survey. So I will stop talking, but yeah.
Good one.
I mean, I agree. It's really hard to spot. Like, I think we said last time, the MSBA prioritizes larger school facilities, and that's the opportunity we have in front of us. We don't have another opportunity that preserves these teeny tiny little schools. That's just not reality for us. And I would love some vision on how to navigate that in a way that feels true to the Somerville community. People who are smarter than I am can probably come up. Like, I know educators have a million ideas. I'm a person who has a million ideas, but I agree that is just a conflict. And to me, the thing that does the most good in the community is getting the money and getting the facilities and getting our kids into great facilities. And so that's my number one priority. And I feel that I love neighborhood schools. I'm all about that too. That's not the process we're in. And that's too bad. And we should do things to change that or advocate. I don't know, but I don't know how to, that's a really tough one. And so I'm, I don't think it's a reason not to go after the money and do the most good we can in our community. That's the good we can do. And I think just leaving an entire school out to dry is really irresponsible.
I counter on that, if I may. So I don't think it's fair to say you're I know.
I wanted to see if I could get everyone's reactions and then we should come back to you.
Andre, because it's saying I'm so.
Why just what the Title 9? It's basically, I think you're right. Still something. It's just me out of us word. Way. It's not a fit that they say take lots and pay. Like all these things were from this one is little actually team. But educationally, it's not a clear way. So this is not. So this part is no. It's a community value.
Yeah. Okay, people we haven't heard from, any reactions? Yeah.
So I still have a lot of things floating around in my head, so I don't think I have anything particularly solid, but what I found interesting reading through the survey results last night and actually not sharing the results, but talking with other teachers today in a meeting I was under here, is that this concept of building a new middle school and shuffling everything has come up multiple times unprovoked. I didn't mention anything about that to the teachers I was talking to today. And I asked them what their thoughts in general were, and they're like, oh, you should make it middle school. I'm like, oh, interesting. And that throws a monkey wrench into all of it with does that help? Does that make it complicated? Well, of course it makes it more complicated. But then there's makes that decision. And I know, Andre, we've talked a little bit about the current school board versus who's going to be the school board in 5-10 years, whatever. So that's kind of an interesting concept. And how does that play into the supporting small neighborhood schools? Is that a way to My brain was thinking about ideas of, is that a way to get a new big school building that can shuffle students around and make space in new school buildings while also allowing for smaller schools? But my brain is full of information and I don't know what coherent that does. So
I saw Andre's comment right there. I think that's worth mentioning right away.
Which is, sorry.
Did MSBA check building things like?
Okay, they did. Yeah, that's what I was going to ask Rich to say.
I did not know that.
Jen, yeah, I'm asking a specific question for this.
So that doesn't mean some future board couldn't do it, but you cannot build it back.
No, that's useful information. Thank you.
Generally, what does that mean?
Generally, they promote K.
Generally, they promote the K, but it's not outright rejected, but it was generally, not in all cases.
Again, this application was for the the Winter Hill. I don't know how we pivot at this point.
I do have to see this one.
The project in the pipeline currently is for a pre-K school for the Winter Hill. I don't know what the response from MSBA would be if we were to suddenly shift that programming at this point in time. They might just say, okay, you're back to the head of the queue, submit a statement of interest for that, and we'll get to this question in 2 years.
I'm not suggesting that about the around show. It's just observations from the day that.
I just want to say we actually did ask if you look full that we wouldn't be able to do it. We would have to do enough application for that.
Cool.
Yeah, just not on that point, but just on general takeaways from the survey and focus groups. I feel like I made my preference of the options in the past, and I could give like certain kind of cherry picks parts of focus groups and things of this to help defend it. But I feel like really the major takeaway is just the community is pretty divided from both the survey and the focus groups. There are preferences of certain groups, and that's useful to name and useful to know. Other than like everyone doesn't want Trump, which is pretty clear, doesn't need to be repeated. I really appreciate, I think Brian mentioned this too, the degree to which in both the survey and the comments and the focus groups and the benefits and concerns, people are naming a lot of the issues that we've named here before. It's actually like a really nice summary of what we've discussed in this group of like what our collective concerns or benefits of different options are. And so we can lean into those and like begin to debate what's the relative value of those things. But it's hard for me to feel like there's any takeaway from the surveys or the focus group itself that gives a clear indication of one of these options being better than other than the points that they raised being things that I think could guide the group to one of the options over the others.
There's a lot of 47, 43.
Yeah, exactly.
I'll tell you whatever story I want to tell you.
Yeah.
Which doesn't necessarily mean there's division, because it could mean that because, we're not digging into like second choices in these cases. Like, I think people are just passionate about getting something new in there at that site. And I think that is the important thing. It doesn't mean one is not going to be supported.
Yeah, I mean, it was pretty surprising how low the like either is acceptable options are. My guess is if you push people, they might say like, things are potentially accessible. They just wanted to name what their first option preference was. So yeah.
Yeah, it would have been interesting if they could say my preference and then how strongly you have that preference.
Yeah, and if this option was ultimately chosen, I would vote against it when it comes to it. Like that we don't have and can't really know, and that's okay.
And I think if we had this survey, this type of survey earlier and not having had sort of the false start of the other survey, I think we would have gone more into detail with some of those questions. But there was a strong need in the subgroup we were talking about to like really minimize the amount of like stress on people in looking through this because of that.
Just a quick question. Do we have any indication on how the new mayor is going to take a recommendation from this, right?
Yeah, somebody got Mickey to the I can't speak for a new mayor, but I kind of speak to what our current mayor is thinking in terms of how to approach this conversation. So this still remains our number one priority in terms of
making sure that we have a new school, and in particular, house the Winter Hill community, and perhaps Brown. We are on track to open a new school September 2031. And so our instructions to all of us on the team have been to keep on track and keep on schedule. And so we are doing everything to continue this process as quickly as possible. And so she is committed to working with whoever is elected next week to ensure that this decision and the recommendation that you're making and part of that decision, that happens in a way that promotes this as quickly as possible. So I can't speak to who will be that person and what their preferences will be and how they will approach it, but this mayor is very willing to work with them to ensure that this goes as smoothly as possible. So that's what I have for you now, but stay tuned.
Prior to the preliminary election, there was a school and libraries focused debate at the East, and Jake Wilson said he would follow whatever the recommendation of the CAG is. Willie Burnley said he would follow whatever the recommendation was as long as it wasn't Trump. So, as far as I'm concerned, they're both in the same spot.
That answers my question.
Yeah, thank you.
I also want to say, as we're talking about all this, that, your core task is to have a recommendation on the school size and location guidance. But with all of this other information, you can give some additional considerations, right? That you really would like the mayor to pass along, that you are recommending for the mayor and for the mayor to pass along, right? And some of those things might be for the school committee or the school committee of the future, right? In regards to what to do about the building that might be left vacant and hitch it, right? Or it might be, thoughts about walkability or thoughts about transportation, right? You can share those as part of your recommendation, right? Not as do X, Y, and Z, but, keep in mind that these are the things people really care about, and here's some ways to state it.
So, yes, because you suggested that we get an opinion. Yeah, I was going to ask, when do we, and speaking of that, because, the teams, he's right. The focus group gives this more granular and non-noise explanation of their opinion. And I think that I confirm the money at stake doesn't allow for the small schools. If we have, it's either being a smaller school at Sycamore or a larger school at Sycamore. That's what the money is for, right? That a school that will accommodate extra students or not. That's the actual thing. But what I think that we should try to send a recommendation where if the larger school is recommended, let's say, the issues I hear a lot about issues about the size. So is it possible to force, not to recommend, to actually force whoever designs this, a type of building that guarantees the functioning of the I cannot say it, AIM program, is too many letters for me. So, and the other needs that the actual programs at winter school and maybe future programs that need to be integrated. Can we give that recommendation with a strong wording that if you're going to be the 900-person school, it has to be this way. It's like we are not voting for any type of big school. It's a yes, let's say, that's a recommendation. I'm inclined for that. I think that we need to go after the money, but I'm not for any school. I don't know. It's not just the building; it's the programming. And I want the school committee to have a plan for it, because I think that they left that a little bit on a limb here, without guidance. So under some conditions, yes, I vote for something. If that cannot be completed, I'm not sure, because the community is divided. So I'm not sure what I can say.
Rich, too.
I want to point out that are there audiences for what this Biggie's recommendation is? And I do think it's very important, as Emily is alluding to, also this Paul is outlining that the conclusions and the analysis and the ancillary pieces of information are just as important. Yes, there's a lot of focus on the mayor's decision and the next mayor's continuation of that. But again, we're in this process with the MSBA, and the school building committee is also driving that. Ultimately, the mayor has like the most sway on that, because under our form of government, the mayor has like 6 seats effectively on the school building committee. And the mayor is the one who approves the debt exclusion to move forward, will approve the appropriation funding. But there are other voices continuing as this moves forward. And I think that particularly those design elements are important to capture and pass on to the school building committee. And I will tell you that the architects that we interviewed, at least 2 of the teams, heard this CAG loud and clear. It was very clear to me that the design firm that selected Perkins Eastman had not only been paying attention, but had watched every single one of these meetings.
Okay.
Because in their package and in their renderings for their initial concepts, and granted, these are just like broad initial concepts before they're even hired, they were showing how they could build a building on Sycamore that felt like 4 different buildings. 4 small buildings. And I don't have direct access to it, but the presentations are on the MSBA website somewhere if you can navigate that damn thing. You can see how our selected architect is already thinking along those lines. So if we can memorialize things like that and other pieces of data that this body thinks is important, that is a fantastic legacy for the work that you all have done in the past 13 months.
For Francia, so poder hablar de ese punto también, porque no solo cuando hablamos de la reconstrucción de Winter Hill y hablamos de la cantidad de estudiantes que está alrededor de 400, recuerden que no nos podemos basar en cómo el edificio actual está hecho, ya que uno de los grandes problemas, aparte de que se cayó el techo, que teníamos que no servía el aire acondicionado, que no tenemos elevador, era que no teníamos suficientes aulas, espacios con los en programa y con la educación especial, porque entonces también eso va a agrandar el edificio, el tener que tener específicas aulas para los maestros que sacan a los niños con educación especial de sus clases, como la psicóloga, como las terapistas del habla, como las de lenguaje, como las de manualidades, y se llevan a estos niños que a veces necesitan estar 1 a 1 con el maestro sin nadie más alrededor. Entonces, estos son espacios importantes que la nueva escuela debe de tener, que Winter Hill no tenía. O sea, esto es sumar aulas, porque eso era parte del problema con nuestros niños de educación especial. Estar recibiendo la educación en el pasillo, escuchando a la otra maestra con el problema del otro niño y el otro espalda con espalda. Entonces, si hablamos de espacios al tamaño, esto sí es algo que sea la escuela combinada o reconstruir Winter Hill, sí se tiene que tener en cuenta que se necesitan los espacios, no solo de las aulas regulares, de los niños regulares, sino los espacios para cada terapista que saca a un niño de la clase regular y necesita hablar a solas con ese niño. Son espacios que a veces creo que no son tomados en cuenta y que pueden ser de que sean espacios perdidos, pero para esa media hora de un niño hablando con su terapista a solas es de importancia, ya que estamos hablando que Winter Health es una de las que se ocupa más de los niños del AIM Program, y que si nos damos cuenta en la realidad de nuestra sociedad, el incremento de niños de educación especial con problemas de autismo va más alto que los impuestos. ¿Y qué va a pasar a futuro si eso no se toma en cuenta? Que esas aulas son aún más necesarias.
Yeah. I appreciate the last comments around what the building is actually going to look like, whether it is Winter Hill or Winter Hill and the Brown combined. I just wanted to remind folks about the educational profile questionnaire that we submitted to the MSBA. We had our director of special education review it, our out-of-school time director, our MLE director, principals in the district, look at our enrollment director, look at projections, look at the current needs, and request capacity for those programs, including 13 separate programs for AIM, spaces for out-of-sphere time with PP, spaces for our newcomer program, spaces for our community school program. So those things were considered in the application and were accepted by the MSBA as needed. I also didn't know if Kenny wanted to talk about the group that is being put together as a part of, I think they're calling it the educational team that's going to start meeting to provide guidance to that group so that the spaces are designed to meet the needs of our student population, whether it be a Winter Hill or a Ridger Hill and again, Brown.
On that, that's a great question. Was CPAC consulted as well, special education parents within Somerville? Were they consulted on that when the application went in? And will CPAC be included in any future design going forward? One thing I have heard from both parents and teachers from the previous incarnation of the Winter Hill School, still on Sycamore, is that, and this is part two to that question, so not trying to ask a lot of questions at the same time, but is that there was no Wi-Fi, so for children, or that providers, SPED providers, and children were very frustrated that some children in the AIM program, where their iPads were essential tools, couldn't use them because they couldn't get Wi-Fi, or parents or teachers couldn't get Wi-Fi accessibility. That was a few years ago. However, at the same time, going forward, how will that be considered? And how considered will the people, the parents on the ground, a la CPAC, who are seeing this every day and living this 24/7, how will they be consulted in that? And were they consulted in the creation of this application process that went to MSBA?
So, Officer was the director of special education on a monthly basis. So it could be that they discussed it in the regular cadence meetings, but I don't know. I don't know if director spoke to them specifically about that. I can find out.
Yeah, thank you. So you're saying that the director of special ed meets with CPAC every month?
Yeah.
And did when they created the application?
Yeah.
Okay. Thank you.
Yeah, I think that just to remind ourselves, and I was slightly, so I was the person helping to make the survey who was like really uptight about language and not using combined school and a bunch of terms that I thought were kind of so in any case, it's a little too bad that combined school is kind of all over this, and the 900 person of it all is also something that's like actually pretty nuanced to talk about, right? So we talk about a 900 seat school, but 900, it doesn't mean 900 students. It means, a space allotment
for 900 kids. You know, it's a lot of that space is for all the things you're worried about. And I guess, I don't know, I haven't seen I haven't seen the winning submission, but I do, from participating in building things on my own, that's the math of it all, is you make sure there's plenty of space because you absolutely don't want to be short or do the wrong thing. You only have one crack at it. So it sounds like Perkins Eastman did a good job doing that. I do, you know, I do want to kind of overlay, you know, I do think Marta put in, over the month of just the process of laying out a school that size on that site raised some issues. And I guess I want to know if all of the submissions that went in just kind of validated the basis of design of 900 seat school on that. Like, is that a real thing that we should be, you know, like, I'm concerned that that's not feasible on this site, and I'm concerned that there's not a backup option there. So
all three teams massed out a building of that scale on that site, and none of them highlighted it as being possible, or in fact that Crum would be preferable for that reason of constructability. None of them were terribly concerned. All of them came up with really great ideas on how to leverage that Sycamore Street site. And in fact, to your point, Perkins Eastman did a digital model on a walkthrough, and I think a lot of you know Courtney Coslow, who's a Winter Hill parent. It brought her to tears during the interview, just how innovative it was.
Back to your comment, because it means that maybe rather than a 900 student, it's a building with the square footage of X size, which in the case of the needs of the AIMS program could be an actual functioning capacity for, let's say, it's 400 plus. So it could be a school that will actually host 600 students.
yeah,
But with a larger footprint to accommodate the special flexible space or extra space. So, because we don't, if I do the math, we don't have 900 students.
I was pushing on the survey that we say it has the capacity for both schools plus some additional, you know, because it's not a 900. And given how strongly the 900, if I were designing a debt exclusion question, I would not put that number anymore. You know, it's very, that's that. But, and I think in general, it's just like,
900 is inclusive of district-wide space.
right, and I mean, and it's so, I guess, yeah,
It's a
like,
future number.
Okay, I understood.
Correct,
Yeah.
Day one, we don't have that many students, but MSBA is basically offering to build out, for the foreseeable future.
yeah, I feel like the city has such good answers to a lot of these things, and we just need them kind of put out there in a positive way, because you have the right answer. I don't know, I want you to have, to be conveying all of this with more vision and positivity, because there's some deep divides to cross, and I think some simple messaging, or maybe not so simple, but some messaging would do a lot of good in a lot of different ways.
And that's why I think, coming back to it, I think this is, to me, the most relevant information for our discussion, the sort of breakdown of that question 4. And again, thinking about this, like, I hear what you're saying, and I think I hear what you're saying, at least where it's like, from a get the most money perspective, the option is, the correct option is obvious because that does the most amount of good there. But it only does the most amount of good if we can think about the concerns of the families impacted by this who really want that, right? Because, it's not like it's a small percentage of the city that like prefers that one. Like, it's not like we're catering to a small special interest group and talking about that. A substantial, about roughly half the city who responded to this survey favors the option that would not get us the most money from the MSBA. And I think that's not something for us to minimize necessarily by saying, we're just going to go with the one that does the most there. So in order to bridge that gap, I think this is really useful to say, what are those concerns? School size is number 3 of those concerns, actually. So like, I think that's a really interesting point too, where it's not the first thing that comes into people's mind when they think about why they don't want that. What I think is walkability is an interesting one, because we've already looked at that data and said, okay, a lot of people think walkability is important even if they're not choosing walkability for themselves. So that's an interesting one to think about. But the one I want to focus on here in this is that maintaining school communities. And I completely agree that the use of combined school is really doing a disservice to that. In fact, from the beginning of this conversation, we've talked about combining Winter Hill and Trump. What we haven't seen yet, and I think this has to come from ultimately the school committee, is the leadership to say, we are building a larger school and redistricting, and we're going to find a way to make it work for everybody in the city. So I would say, I really like your idea of an opinion type document. And if we're going to go with the path of getting the most amount of money, these are the key concerns that the building committee and the school committee have to really lay out and follow through on, and not just give lip service to. It's like, how are you preserving those school communities? How are we thinking about community schools and stuff like that? How are we ensuring that there's enough space? Because I've also heard from teachers and parents that a larger school isn't a problem for everybody with special education concerns. I know in Winter Hill right now we have extremely low enrollment in several of the lower grades. I think starting the school year there were like 7 kids in some of the lower grade classes. That actually makes it harder sometimes to less, at least in my conversations, less opportunity to integrate students that way. So there are advantages that people aren't necessarily thinking about if that's not what they're doing. So it's not our job to resolve that, but I think it's our job to highlight those concerns that people need to address. What worries me is we say, this is the option for us to do. We need a bigger school in the absence of a plan to actually address some of those concerns and stuff like that.
I think a specific concern too that came up with the survey results, and there was a question either in a focus group or a survey response, I don't remember where, about with walkability being such a high priority, if you are talking about having students who currently go to the Brown, go to the Sycamore location, how are they getting there? And there were questions about busing, and is that an option? And because depending, if families do live in the area around the school, that is a little bit of a trek. So that's a logistical question that would be important for this, given the priorities listed here.
I think, just to say, I think in some of the focus groups, we heard them say like, there should be a plan that is clear for parents for how they're gonna get, like, so maybe it's integrated with the transportation planning and the bike and pedestrian planning, right? To make sure that there is, like I think people talked about, the community path actually goes right from Davis Square and it takes you, much of the way, right? So there are, like, as long as there are routes, right? So those are things you guys, I think your point, Matthew, is right on. For your task is to say, people care about these things. Here's the way we would recommend the city think about, take on addressing this issue within this option, right? And then you can have very specific, some of your suggestions might be create a plan, right? And some of them might be much more specific, like create a small school feel for AIM students that has these things, right? Or whatever you might do, right? That can all be put into your recommendation.
Really quick on the walkability. Thanks for recognizing me. Really quick on the walkability. That's not including January. That's not including families with 2 or 3 children at 2 or 3 separate schools. It's a lot more complex than simply the community path, and that has to be acknowledged. And to your point about a plan, that has to be. But walkability, it's not just that. I hear frequently from families with just that. 3 kids in 3 separate schools, or 2 different, or what happens in the center of February. They don't always use the community path in the center of February. So,
but are you saying that? But they are walking, or they're now they want to drive.
Yes, there are. It's not only walkability in the center of February, and at 3 separate schools.
Not just transportation and walkability. Right?
Yes.
Yeah, I was gonna say that was a really strong signal in the data, the walkability piece, and I think we need an answer to if you live in the current Brown catchment, you could be 1.5 miles,
right,
and you're not going to walk that. You're going to drive, right, or pursue some other option. So I think we have to start to think about that. That's something to address, maybe in our recommendations. And the other thing I think this is probably an offline task, but like getting better clarity on this, are our options a 450 person, like a 1-to-1 replacement for current Winter Hill, 900, which is like Winter Hill Brown and then even more, and then, or is there Winter Hill Brown, which is 650, 700, which is what we started with. Like getting, we don't have to answer that now, but I think getting some better clarity, because I want to know if I'm voting for one, what am I voting for?
Do you want to speak to that? Just the question of if it's just Winter Hill, it's not 450, right?
Whatever.
Or at least what the MSBA would allow. Oh, it is 450. So the MSBA would not allow additional capacity if you're not replacing the Brown.
Would have to be negotiable.
Okay, but it's not off the table.
Yeah.
Okay, so it's not off the table.
So,
It's
but
still
I also don't think it's knowable before 2 weeks from now. So I think this falls into the category of observations.
Again, I think this is where we need to, whatever we decide, it requires more leadership from the school committee, because some percentage of Brown students in starting in 6th grade will go to Kennedy already, and so there's already sort of a little bit of a built-in sort of trajectory for students, lack of a better word. And what we saw from the enrollment data is that across the board for almost every single school, and I can't find it right now to pull it up, roughly 50% of the students kind of come from outside that catchment.
No, it varied very much.
Well, so I can't remember.
Hill and Brown.
For Winter Hill and Brown. So maybe some percentage, and I don't know how to know this, but maybe some percentage of students who go to Brown now will say their families will say, well, first of all, none of the students who go to Brown now will make this selection. That's the other thing to consider there, right? But families who might have selected Brown otherwise say, hey, here's a new school with new facilities, and we're closer to it. Instead of going to Brown, we want to go to that one. There's going to be some ebb and flow. And in terms of distributing schools based on equity and diversity, whatever other values the school committee requires, that's their job to do. The fact that we have a school that people identify in some of these surveys that's not diverse is that's the responsibility of the school committee more than anything else. And so getting to that point is not something getting past that is not something we can fix. But if we put a better school, Brown is not there, it's more of a gut feeling than anything. A lot of students and a lot of families will work themselves out about what works from them regardless of that, because it's not super far from Kennedy or West, for example.
Yeah, and also we mentioned this before, that let's say there is a combined school at that, or a larger school at that location. That doesn't mean that strictly whoever is maybe it's just like you say, redistricting, right? Like everybody now gets a slightly different
Proximity
school. Okay.
Okay, let me take one more and then let's talk about what happens next.
Yeah, I think just to put a point on this, I agree the walkability is a loud signal in the data, but I don't know if walkability is just catching everyone for whom transportation matters. If it's
A lot of people spoke about biking or
right, well, or just like there needs to be a plan for how my kid gets to school, because I'm totally sensitive to the difficulties there. But anyway, it's maybe a flaw in how we phrased it, but it's just like, is this catching everybody who says, oh yeah, I want to be proximate to a school, or I just want away from it. So I don't want to overhear walkability, but I want to hear appropriately.
Is it possible to break this data down from question 4 factors into more demographic groups? Because again, I think looking at Brown School, for example, we know from the data that there's a greater degree of affluent students, and kind of by definition of it not being ADA compliant, there's a lower number of students who would have mobility concerns just because they couldn't use the building otherwise. So, is that something that could bias that sort of, again, not the decision, but the way we talk about the decision?
Yeah, and I just want to, I actually looked because the ward data was a little fuzzy. If you look at the census tract, the most affluent census tract in Somerville are Kennedy, Argenziano, West, then Brown, then Argenziano. And if you look at the area around Brown, it's the least affluent area of Davis Square. So I think we keep just describing like affluence as this general term to mean lack of low income, but it is not actually the most affluent kids in the most affluent census tract go to Kennedy. They go to West. That's fair. They go to West. So I think we just should have a little better clarity when we use that term, because that was one that jumped out at me, was that we were just saying affluence without really defining what we mean by that.
Okay, so our next meeting is November 10th. We have also set a meeting for 2 weeks after that to do our just final. My thought is what I'd like to be doing at our next meeting is really talking through what's the report going to look like, what's it going to include, and then we will have some time to actually put that into prose, ideally send it to you, get your thoughts, do a round of fixing it up, and come back for our final meeting to try and get final sign-off and do any final wordsmithing. We can have a majority and a minority report. If you don't all agree on the core recommendation of location and size, you can have here's the majority recommendation in terms of the option 1 or option 2, and then you can have a minority report. And what you could do then in that is perhaps there's someone who prefers option 1, but if the group prefers option 2, can say, but if you were gonna do option 2, even though it's not my preference, consider these things, right? And vice versa. If it were, you prefer option 2, and in the option 1 report, you would say, if you were gonna do it, these are considerations, right? So that's my sense of sort of where we're heading.
But yeah, so when we decide, because I think that it won't be fair if I think that we need to come to this decision, right, privately, say vote, and because I think one way, but then am I influenced? Am I convinced? So is there a mechanism where we can sort of write a draft of our personal opinion, really our true opinion, like meaning, because otherwise you tend to sort of, it's good to have a majority opinion, but do we really want to bully everybody into the majority?
Yeah,
Is there a way to do it that way?
So that's a great idea. So that was actually going to be another suggestion I was going to offer, which is we can create a little poll for all of you. We can send it out, and between now and our next meeting, we can compile, here's where people are leaning for the decision, here's the considerations, and we can put all that together and bring that as a starting point for our discussion at the next meeting.
At the same time, I'm not pushing back, but I'm a little skeptical because a lot of the conversations between now when we're in this meeting and next month, emails have been very, very low response rate, correct?
What do you mean? To all of you?
No, not you, but in general, members of the CAG, most people from what I understand, not a lot of people have been responding online, like on the emails.
Like if we give you a poll,
Yes,
you're saying
correct.
people won't answer.
Correct.
Okay,
Or not
so
that
that's
they
the question.
won't, but that a small
No, do people have
percentage
time
of
if
them.
we send
That's
you,
what I'm saying.
if we send it to you, right? And
There's a time response rate.
And Gandhi, if you're okay with a Google Translate version, we can get it quicker. If you want a full official translate, it'll just take a couple extra days. But we can get that out to you very quickly, right? And then that's the question, right? Yeah, sometimes we only get response from a few people, that is true. So that's why it's a question to all of you, because I think if only 3 people respond, it's probably not that.
Exactly. I worry about the fair representation of that.
Yeah.
That's, and not that I'm against it, but I'm just saying
So that's a question.
The trend,
Do people
we
feel
haven't
like you can commit to,
I do feel like, and I feel like you were about to say something like this, Emily, is like, I do feel like that time frame is just, we're not going to be able to have a conversation without any document in front of us in that time frame and actually come to a conclusion.
right, so that will be a helpful tool.
I would propose, personally, anybody so motivated to do so, write up an opinion and we can actually read it and talk about it before that. I feel like if somebody's got something and then it can be edited, it's easier to edit in collaboration than write in collaboration.
Well, that is why I think instead of one person writing it, that's my suggestion was, if I can get as much from all of you, we can try to compile a first draft for you all to then edit.
But I feel like it's not your recommendation.
Well, but presumably your whatever poll you send out can have like open responses
Exactly.
that could include some of this information.
Yes, exactly.
That, like,
I'm going to compile.
This work is. I am thinking if we can have in front of us something like that, exactly. Like when we see perspectives, I feel like when we reflect on our own times and what others said here today, we might come up with something that is valuable or interesting or adds to and gives nuance to whatever strict opinion. I think that the more we go towards that, it will reflect more valuable, usable thing for the people that needs to take this and run with it.
Yeah.
So, and I think that this was very useful today. So
Yeah, I think anything we can have in front of us at the
Okay.
next meeting
Will do.
can only help.
So we'll get something out to you all. If we can get it back, we'll come up with the timeline. But we'll give you guys a little time and then we'll have a little time to compile it.
Do you want a subcommittee to help make the poll and?
No. I do not.
Are you volunteering?
Yes. Hang on.
Es tarde, pero tal vez lo último que quisiera recordarles, porque yo sé que todos tenemos sentires, opiniones, puntos de vista, situaciones totalmente diferentes, pero lo único que, mi corazón por lo que me tiene aquí es algo. Esta camisa que yo cargo hoy es el sentir de todo un indeciso. Desde el 2000 nosotros hemos estado brincando entre Zoom, High School, la TAF, Sycamore, Elderly y Capuano. Son 5 años que nuestros niños parecen pelota de ping-pong de un lado a otro. Y que está haciendo de que muchos están huyendo de nuestra escuela y otros tenemos miedo de llegar. Lo digo en mi opinión porque mi niño de AIM Program con ADHD, que está ahorita en Capuano, su next va a ser Winterfield. Pero estoy aterrada de que vaya a Elderly, no tiene espacio, no hay un jardín infantil, no hay aulas donde él se pueda seguir desarrollando porque su AD es elevado. Entonces solo les pido que piensen en lo que estos niños necesitan, que son los de Winterhill en este sentido, de que no retrasemos nada más para que se dé a cabo la construcción de la escuela, ya sea que tengamos un grupo más grande o como toque que sea solo Winterhill, pero que por favor nos ayuden a que este edificio se haga lo antes posible, porque los niños actuales están sufriendo y no quisiera ver a otras mamás sufriendo en el futuro, porque veo niños del AIM Program de Capuano que están empezando, que van a estar en esta escuela. El mío posiblemente puede ser uno, porque le quedan 8 años entre la middle school y todo para esto. Entonces solo esos puntos quisiera, o sea, vean lo que estos niños están sufriendo. Y hay ciertos puntos también, como padres nos hemos acoplado a tener que ir hasta la TAF, nos hemos acoplado a tener que ir hasta la Elderly, nos hemos acoplado. ¿Hemos renegado? Sí. ¿Hemos llorado? Sí. Pero nos hemos acoplado en la meta de que nuestros hijos tienen que estudiar. Entonces es lo único que pido, por favor, en general. Que piensen en el sufrimiento que Winterfield está teniendo y que no retrasemos nada, por favor.
Not delaying is a priority for this whole process. It is not slowing anything down. Thank you. Yes, we will send you all out. Yeah.